Hello, I'm Sally Aneri, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they face their fears. Today we're heading to a beautiful mountain village in Cyprus, and I'm in conversation with a man of many talents whose work I've long admired. He spent years helping quiet people find their voice without shouting, and empowering them and those who lead them to embrace quietness as a strength. Pete Mosley is a writer and speaker, a deep thinker, a creative, a business mentor, and a fellow coach and nature lover. His journey began in the arts with a degree in fine art and many years in community art in the UK and the US. Along the way, chance opportunities enabled him to discover his talents for training and development and for writing, and he obtained a postgraduate qualification in business and personal coaching. But it's Pete's work of recent years that has really made his biggest impact on the world. A quiet person himself, he's specialised in working with introverts, quiet and shy people, and those who lead and manage them. Through talks, workshops, individual and group coaching, and above all through his trilogy of beautifully written books on the subject, he helps quiet people grow in confidence and find their voice, and he helps organisations make better use of their quiet talent. As a leadership coach, I've worked with a lot of introverted leaders, and I know very well that effective leadership doesn't always mean being the loudest voice in the room. It can also mean being the one who listens best. Pete's made a huge contribution to our understanding of this and towards creating a more inclusive work environment and leadership landscape. It's a shift that's continuing, and in our conversation we explore Pete's ideas and tap into the wisdom he's gained from his vast experience.
I noticed something in my coaching teaching practice a few years ago, which was a thing that we do with the participants on the coaching course that I'm very privileged to lead part of. We do a thing called peak experience, where we ask people to describe the things and places in their lives that have given them that feeling of being absolutely present and in the space that really matters to them. And folk identify lots of different things, but the things that I've consistently identified for myself over the years have been being by the sea and being up mountains or up hills or walking in hills, whilst having the paradox of living in Loughborough in the UK, which is the furthest possible point from the sea that it's possible to be. So I've always thought, when I've been leading these people through that question, that I've been going, damn it, I can't see my way to getting those things for myself, and especially not both of them. And then a series of circumstances arrived where I suddenly found myself with the freedom to move and have a choice of buying another place in the UK or being more adventurous than that. And I've been going backwards and forwards to Cyprus for quite a long time now, a couple of decades, and I do love the place. And I thought, I wonder what it'd be like to find a little mountain village somewhere that's kind of like half an hour from the sea and half an hour from the mountains, because you can in Cyprus. It's quite a small island. And that led to a series of journeys where I spent a long time on the island, travelling literally from one end to the other, looking for this place. And a year ago, past Christmas, I arrived and by sheer fluke got taken to this little, very lovely house in a mountain village in what they call the wine villages in Cyprus. I opened the door and just fell in love with the place and decided to set about buying it. And, my aims really for the place are to find a place of peace and solitude for myself where I can continue writing, continue devising the work that I do that benefits both individuals and organizations, really, to get deeper into contact with nature and the wild, which is always really important to me, and to find a place that was by nature quiet and where my quiet soul could, be at peace. And that I've found, and that's been quite liberating, really.
Sounds magical. And I can identify with the feeling of falling in love with a place. And what I'm hearing is that was the first thing that was like a heart decision as you opened the door. You fell in love and then later kind of thought it through and it made sense, right? And so the love, the peace, the quiet, the solitude, nature, being in nature, and a place that I'm hearing aligns with your nature.
course. I mean, I've always been a quiet person, and there are reasons why I've always been a quiet person, and it's largely nothing to do with introversion at all. It's to do with things that happened to me in my childhood. And so I've been a person who's survived very well on their own for long, long periods of time, and loneliness is not something that I really suffer from a lot, now and again, but not a lot. Because I actually thrive on long periods of time on my own, and I travel well on my own, and I like exploring places on my own. But I never thought that I would end up moving 2,500 miles to a tiny little community where, largely speaking, I don't speak the language, and not a lot of them speak English, and landing in a community like that, which is very beautiful, and finding that it was an absolute 100% fit for me. I mean, there's some funny things happened along the way in me landing there and gradually being accepted by the villagers who, largely don't like a lot of change, but they do like novelty, and I've been a bit of a novelty for them in some.
And the interesting and amusing things along the way, do you have one to share with us?
I think the fairest thing to share is the absolute generosity that I've encountered from people that I've met the minute I arrived. I parked, and I was actually quite nervous because I didn't know how I'd be received in the tiny little square that's only got 4 or 5 houses facing onto it. And I parked up. Only just got the key. I opened the boot of the car, and this tiny little green Nissan Micra rolled up, and a window wound down, and this lovely older raisin-like woman, baked from the sun, chain smoking, said, "Hello, I am your neighbour. I am Maria. If there's anything you need, you must ask." And she wrote her number down on the page of a notebook and tore it off and handed it to me. And she said, "I must go now. I will see you later," and disappeared. So there's me standing, not even packed, with this lovely telephone number from this extraordinary woman, as I've discovered, who just welcomed me from second one into the village and totally open. The following morning, I heard a tap on my gate, and there she was standing with a tray full of food and local delicacies and cheeses and eggs and everything you could possibly imagine that I might need to survive the next few days, and say, "Here, this is for you," and explained the things that I didn't recognise on it. And it's just carried on like that, from people arriving, knocking on the door with a pair of pomegranates, or, my other next door neighbour introduced himself as, "Hello, I'm Achilles, the man with the heel." And he said, "It's all right, Mr. Peter." They call me Mr. Peter in the village. "You don't need to tell me who you are. I already know. We all already know. The story has gone round the village. So, you're very welcome here." Because they kind of knew that I was an author and that I was a teacher and so on. Everybody knows that now, which is immensely helpful in some respects and utterly frightening in other respects, because one wonders what they're talking about. But I've not had a problem with it, really. So it's been funny and charming in that respect.
And immensely kind. And their curiosity about you is, I guess, touching is the word that comes to mind, and very human. And I'm wondering, what do you feel you give back to that?
Well, I mean, their kindness and their curiosity is driven by other things as well. The lady who arrived with the 2 pomegranates, as soon as I opened the yard gate, she just walked straight into the yard. They do. And said, "Hello, I am the sister of the woman that you bought the house from. I'm really curious, And so this history spilled out, and I discovered the house used to be the pig pen for the village, where they fattened up the pig for the Christmas and kept the chickens and all the rest of it. So I got a potted history of it. But they are innately curious and very open, and really, really want to find out who you are and what you do, and to see inside. I realised very quickly that, of course, everybody in the village has been in the house at some point, because the lady that owned it and her husband they were quite prominent in the village. They would have had parties, they would have had events where everybody just piled in, and so folk curious to know what I'm doing to the place, So that self-serving element to their curiosity as well. But I really don't mind.
No, I suppose the feeling of being included, not excluded, welcomed, not pushed away, that counts for a lot, doesn't it? And so this quiet and solitude that you were perhaps seeking, is that what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, with all the curiosity that arrived in a flurry of me, in the first few months, I did wonder whether I'd be able to maintain this balance of being an active member of the community and getting the peace and quiet that I wanted. But they do respect that very much. They understand now that I'm a quiet person, and they don't intrude. So I'm not really having a problem with that. And I've set about my village life, but I've also set about building a kind of professional life for myself in Cyprus by hooking up the local coaching organizations and some of the creative organizations. And I now have this lovely choice of whether I'm in the village or I can drive down to one of the 3 cities that are available to me and do that other thing as well. What I haven't done yet is really set down to the thinking and writing, because I've had some work to do on the house, and I'm getting it into the state where now, from September, October, really, I'll be able to offer it to people to come for a week or so and have a proper retreat there and to enjoy the same things in that place that I enjoy, because it will tend to be people that are a little bit like me, or writers or creative people that will come.
Yeah, and so you're looking forward to offering that, and I'm imagining that that you're shaping that in your mind at the moment, and as you say, the kind of people it will appeal to. And yet, you have very recently published the third of your trilogy, of quiet books, or your quiet trilogy, haven't you? So, nevertheless, you've managed to do a bit.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I haven't done much, actually. I've moved into a house 2,400 miles away and written a book and completed it and published it in e-form, not yet in paperback form. So, yeah, I've achieved quite a lot, and I need to now knuckle down to getting that book out into the marketplace and to the people who really need to read it.
And what I'm hearing in your description of the life that you're creating for yourself on this beautiful island is at the core of it is independence. You haven't used that word. It's just what I'm hearing. It's, I suppose, what do I mean by that is being able to choose what you do, when, and who with.
Yes, I mean, independence and quiet and solitude and a lovely word, intronaut, a person who spends a lot of time thinking about their place in the world. Those all kind of intertwine for me, and the nature of the place encourages that. Being able to, in 2 minutes, be up at the top of the village and out into the vineyards and the almond trees and really have space and fresh air to think with only nature as companion is a wonderful thing to access.
And what is what do you see as your place in the world?
It's interesting because I think the place that I am now and the reputation that I've developed is not one that I've actively sought to develop in an ego-like way. It's one that's actually developed because I've continued to respond to what other people have seen in me and the questions that they've asked me, which has been the source of all my writing. All of the teaching comes from, what can you tell me about this experience of quiet? I'm quiet perhaps myself, or I'm absolutely not quiet. What can you tell me about what it is you get? And what I get, if you were to look at it from a neuroscientific point of view, are all the things that neuroscientists call positive emotional attractors, which are peace and quiet and being in nature and the ability to have the time to breathe and to stay still and to be with animals and to be with other people if you choose, and to stay away from the opposite, which is the pressure and the hurly-burly and the stuff that you have no control over in terms of incoming media and incoming uninvited interruptions. So, one might say that actually I've had the opportunity to create this little dream world for myself. It's not quite as twee as that. It has its hard bits too. But I sense that other people are very hungry for information on how to replicate that for themselves and how to get a bit of that peace for themselves, really.
Speaking to an unmet need, perhaps. Knowing, having what I'd sometimes describe as like a niggly feeling inside that something isn't quite right, and then exploring, and then you say something and it resonates, and then they want to know more. And so, obviously impossible to say because it's not what happened, but the sense that you have evolved in response to the inquiries of others rather than, as you put it, an ego-driven sense of your journey.
I think so. It's not an ego-driven journey, but there's an awful lot of personal inquiry, direct inquiry going on there. And I mean, more recently, we're talking about Fearless Forward. One of the things that I've really had to think about and embrace and become settled with is the notion of my own mortality. Moving away from support systems, 4 or 5 hours flight away. My brother lives in France, so he's not in the UK, so there's a distance there. And when you set off on a journey like that, you start encountering questions like, what happens if I pop my clogs in the middle of what systems do I need in place? So there's been immensely practical organizational things that I've had to think about, but also my own notion of, how do I feel about never mind 4,000 weeks, the much shorter period of time that now may be available to me in what might be the last third of my life, if I'm really optimistic about it. But being in a place like that provides ample space to reconcile all of those things. And it's fascinating because I've realized over the last few months of being there that I've actually chosen a village that is immensely close to the little village in Scotland that I grew up in, quite small, and had a church. And I wake up to church bells quite often, and it's very reassuring. And it's almost the closing of a circle. And I hadn't, somewhere deep inside of me, when I saw that village and I saw that place and said yes to it, I must have been subconsciously tuning into those things.
The falling in love. I'm no means an expert in this field, but I know the feeling of falling in love with a place because that's what happened to me too. So I can directly, personally relate to it. And it feels, doesn't it, deeply subconscious. It's not a conscious choice.
Yeah, it's a return. And it's a return to something on a very deep level. It's quite familiar to me.
Would you like to share a little bit about your childhood? You mentioned earlier that, you don't call yourself an introvert, that you feel that you see your quietness to have come more from your childhood experiences. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Well, not at all, because I talk about this in the book. It's a necessary preface to me talking about my distrust of the labels of introversion and things like that. But when I was a kid, I had a couple of childhood illnesses. One which was painful and recurrent over a very long period of time. It took a lot of time for them to solve that and sort it out, but it was hard. And the other was a kind of near-death experience that I had, which kind of jolted me into a different way of thinking about reality, really. Even at that young age, I became conscious. The way I describe it is a sense of having been away and come back again. And the combination of things really led to me being quite a shy child. My parents were quite shy and withdrawn anyway, and they'd both been in the Second World War and were fairly quietened by that experience. So I grew up in a quiet environment. I had those experiences. I was a shy child, didn't push myself forward. Later on in life, I did Myers-Briggs and came out as an INFJT, which is possibly the most introverted you can be if you trust that scale. And I thought, oh, that's who I am. And I wore that badge for a while. And then later I did some therapy that related back to the early childhood experiences and realized that it was that, of course, that had shaped my quiet nature. And it led me into a place where actually I quite enjoy being on my own. The notion of the kind of sense of traumatic withdrawal, you do dissociate if you've been traumatized. I understand all that now, but I actually still quite like that place, and it's come to be one of my favorite places is just retreating and having the time and space to think and breathe. And gosh, I wish that resource were available to an awful lot more people because I think it would have an impact. I mean, if I acknowledge that there are certain bits of thinking that I share with Buddhism and an Eastern way of thinking about things, we are assailed and beaten fairly severely by our own thinking. And it's very difficult. And we tend to think of ourselves as very separate in the world and quite alone. which again is a product of our upbringing and our pigeonholing by people and other people's expectations. And it's only once we make that realization and begin to divest ourselves of those layers and layers and layers of societal conditioning that we strip ourselves bare or down to the bare essentials, which is the capacity simply to be in the world and to breathe and to enjoy that very minimal sense of being at one and connected, that we really begin to be able to relate to other people in a kind of more peaceful way. So I share that thinking with a lot of Buddhist thinkers who, we need to have a quiet footprint, really, rather than a noisy, loud one. And it's for our benefit.
Or at least know how to access that. And what I'm hearing there, you didn't use the word, but what I heard was a sense of freedom in that.
Oh, absolutely. Once those things fall away and you realize just how connected you are to everyone and everything, you suddenly realize that you are deeply connected to other people in a way that allows you to access much more than if you're looking at each other through a veil of expectation. I mean, there are a couple of communities and tribes that I'm a part of that really brought that to the fore for me. One is the Happy Startup Summer Camp organisation that I know you're familiar with. The other is the Barefoot Coaching Community, both of which I have grown into. And actually, it was a session at the Startup Summer Camp a couple of years ago where I drew my first visual plan from which I executed what I've just done over the last couple of years. The plan was run by this wonderful person in the startup community who does, Dan, who does lovely drawing work. And he just helped me visualize all the component parts. And I drew it on almost on a scrap of paper, really, in the space of an hour, which was to do with the mountains and the sea and the quiet and the peace and the Mediterranean diet and the lovely food in the sea and the sense of having a community and the ability to not be part of that and be on my own, if that was what I chose. But it certainly allowed me to really visualize, and this is something that I teach other people to do, really visualize the range of options that I had, and I didn't need to tread the narrow path of the conventional. I could choose something much broader and have a much bigger palette of experience to choose from.
So I suppose a little bit like a vision board, but with a difference. And this sense, I'm beginning to gain a picture of this person, you, kind of moving seamlessly, it would seem, between solitude and interaction, community, in the different communities that you like to be part of.
There's a group that I've joined of artists and a little gallery they're associated with in Paphos, which is a coastal town, very lovely. That's about 50 minutes drive from me. But I was just visualizing I've got a little red Jeep because you need a tiny little vehicle to get about in the mountains. And I leave my house and drive through this astonishing series of vistas on the way down to the coast, which I have to stop most times and take a breath because it's staggering. And it gently eases you down onto the coastal main road and into the city. And it does feel a bit seamless because there's this period of adjustment between the two things. And I get the same on the way back that allows me to morph from one sense of myself into another. So by the time I get into the city, I'm quite happy and looking forward to rubbing shoulders with a bunch of people and having a bit of fun and a good chat.
So interesting, isn't it? Because I talk about this quite a lot in my work too, is the importance of the transition that we pay so little attention to, or perhaps feel we don't have the capacity to in our busy lives. We move quickly from one thing to the next, and the transitions are such a valuable space. So there you have the physical nature helping you with that, moving your spirit, I'm hearing, through into a slightly different place of interaction with others. A different mode, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a word that we haven't explored yet, which is slow. And what I've described as a slow transition. It's not moving quickly from one thing to the other. Moving quickly from one thing to the other really, really upsets me. It jiggles me. I don't like that. So the notion that I have the choice to just move slowly from one thing to the next and have plenty of space in between events, which is also really important to me, I think there's a lesson in there about what the impact of slowing down can have on you as a person, your thinking, your physiology, your emotions, your sense of connectedness to the world. And I think the pace of life it's a cliche, I know, but the pace of life does not help people experience those things. And if I can reach out in a way and say, come here, experience those things with me, you'll go home feeling much better for it.
Well, you'll know what it feels like. You're giving yourself the chance to feel it. And once you feel it, your body doesn't forget that. It's easier to return to, isn't it? But I think it is something I've grappled with over the years, which I'm hearing you have too, is how to do that in a busy life for people whose life is run by a series of have-tos, mortgage to pay, children to feed and school and so on, all of the things, right, that are part of life, even if we'd wish they, not to say that going on retreat isn't immensely valuable, and that's, as you know, part of what I offer too, but how to help people in their busy lives to create the sense of connection that you've been talking about. So I've come to that through this thing I call the pause tool, just to create a little bit of space between the stimulus and how you respond to it. And that's something I've thought about for years now. And I think there's an awakening to it. What I've noticed over the years of doing this work, and it might just be because the circles I'm moving in, but nevertheless, an awakening, a general awakening to the importance, even if it's not fully understood, the importance of slowing down, pausing, creating space, connecting.
I think that what you've referenced, and I understand through a different author, Viktor Frankl, who talked about the space between stimulus and response being an opportunity to engage and make the best possible decisions that one can. But also, side by side with that, is the ability that I've developed, and again, I try and teach to other people, to not spend too much time either thinking about the uncertainties of the futures or the troubles of the past, because when you're in those spaces, you're not present. You're not for yourself, and you're certainly not there for anybody else, And it takes quite a bit of mental judo to get yourself into a place where you can be completely present.
So how do you do that for yourself and for others, Pete?
Well, it started off really with simple practices of breathing and walking. I'm a kind of advocate. I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist, who talks about walking meditation. And I walk to connect, not to travel a distance. I'll happily go out, and I'm sure I frustrate people in my path by walking immensely slowly to the point of just grinding to a halt if I see something that I find interesting. So there are practices. What I talk to other people about is simple daily practices. Meditation does not have to be difficult, and it doesn't need to take a long time. But also a technique that I learned a few years ago from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is cognitive diffusion, which is the ability to isolate and separate yourself from your thoughts, get some control over your thinking, and to still it.
So if I were to come to you and say, look, Pete, I really struggle. I do all the things. I practice pausing. I do all of that. But my thoughts invade me. I feel as if I've got 20 brains working at once. How would you help me with that?
Well, there's a lovely analogy that comes again from ACT, which is what they call the sushi train metaphor. I don't know whether you've ever been in a Yo sushi restaurant where all the dishes go round mesmerizingly in front of you, and they're to tantalize you. And what you do is you just end up taking off plate after plate after plate, often ending up having eaten too much with a huge bill, and the things are still going round in front of you. That to me is a wonderful analogy for what we do with our thinking. The thoughts come around and we take them off habitually. We take them off and we examine them, we consume them, and then we end up with this terrible clutter in our mind that's very hard to clear, and there's a high mental cost attached to it. We need to learn to leave the thoughts on the conveyor belt, and that's what cognitive diffusion is about. It's about being able to say, oh, I'm doing that thinking thing again. What is this thought that I'm having? And what do I want to do with it? Do I actually want to think about that now, or do I want to leave it on the train, or do I need to make myself a mental note about what to do with it and schedule it for somewhere? Keep a set of Post-it notes by the bed, and when you have a troubling thought in the middle of the night saying, right, I'm going to deal with my worry about my renewing my passport tomorrow morning, stick that on the thing, and then go back to sleep again. It takes some practice, but you can get to the point where if you get fed up with your thinking, you just say, right, stop, and you can find yourself that space to then decide what you want to do with it and whether you want to engage with that thought or not.
And in that moment, I suppose, you're realizing that you're not your thoughts. That's the moment in which you kind of separate from them.
Yeah, one's thoughts are not one's identity, and I don't think people actually realise that. We bumble through life thinking our thoughts are us and our thoughts are our identity, and it's not a good place to be in, because your thoughts arrive with you unbidden. Often, you don't have a lot of control over where they come from or what they're about, which can lead to utter chaos if you don't have some practice to interrupt that.
So I suppose it's the understanding of that, or at least the acceptance of that, and then the practice to enable it to happen. Without the practice, it remains at the sort of cognitive understanding level, and it doesn't actually change anything. Okay, so the practices, so breathing, being in nature, the practice you spoke of separating from your thoughts, leaving them going round, letting them do that. Simple things, as you say, of noting on a post-it note so that you can lay it down for a moment, come back to it later. All of the things. So many different ways. But starting with the recognition, I suppose, that allowing our thoughts to drive our behaviors is not always the best way.
Because, I mean, our thoughts, they rise up from the subconscious, in our subconscious. There are so many beliefs that we have about ourselves that aren't always terribly useful to us, in the work that I do, coaching other people and learning about coaching and training other people to coach. We become aware of where that faulty thinking comes from and how to intercept it and how to rewrite negative thinking if we want to. It's just having or developing that palette of tools and having those tools available to you to intervene for yourself, but also being able to share that with other people is immensely valuable and is the most satisfying thing about what I do.
And so for you, coming to that place of being able to do the work on yourself and the work for others has a lot to do with solitude, time to reflect in the right kind of place. And that's what you found, circling right back to the beginning of this conversation. Why Cyprus now? It sounds as if you've found that place.
Yeah, it's not been without struggle. I mean, when I go right back to when I first tried to learn to relax, to use body scanning techniques, within seconds of switching the tape on, I felt like I was drowning. I was panicking. I couldn't cope with the notion that I wasn't in control. And it took a long time to get used to that. I mean, it's a recognized thing is a phobia about relaxation. And a lot of people do suffer from it. You sit down, you switch the tape on, you switch the music on, you start to drift away, and all of a sudden you jolt back into reality because it's very hard to give up the dependence we have on the stresses and strains. The brain does not like unfamiliar places, and going into a quiet place maybe for the first time can be quite disturbing for people. I had a friend, and we used to go out for country walks, and he wouldn't come with us. We told him once that we were going to a Paul Smith clothing sale in Derbyshire because he was very dapper. He got with us, and we took him out to Dovedale, which is a beautiful dale in the Derbyshire Dales. And he got out the car, and he was physically sick because he couldn't cope with the open space. Eventually we had to bundle him in the car and take him home again. But, I mean, that deep reaction to moving all of a sudden out of that control that we have over ourselves by retaining our stress and such like. It's quite hard to get over for some people, and I struggled with it to begin with.
And do you feel that struggle and perhaps some of the others are related to fear?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the brain tends to wander off into quite negative places anyway. Given half a chance, it will go to the negative, won't it, rather than the positive. And when we go to the negative, we start mulling over all the things that we're struggling with, or we imagine that we might be potentially struggling with in the future. And from that comes a fear of doing the things that really matter to us. But you need to notice that that's what's happening before you can do anything about it. So you need a kind of guide, if you like, to get you to say, are you noticing what's happening here? And they go, oh, yeah, actually, I do. I can see the join between these two things. And yes, I do need to work on that and do something about it. That noticing is the first step. So that helps alleviate some of the fear that comes with the simple exploration of it.
The fear of what you might find, the fear of doing what really matters and not succeeding, or what's behind that?
Yeah, fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of injuring yourself, all quite rational stuff. I mean, the trick, and I talked about mental judo earlier on, I think one of the things is to realize that your fears are there to a signpost. They're there to inform you about something that's going on at a deeper level. And if you're prepared to engage with what's going on at a deeper level and explore that a bit, all of a sudden you get a realization of what fear is there for and begin to see it as a friend rather than an opponent. Once you've made that switch and you recognize that your fears are there and anxieties are there for a purpose, life becomes a lot simpler.
Much easier, not something to avoid, but ideally to embrace. Embrace might be pushing it, but at least to not to turn away from. And as you say, to understand they're a signpost, a helpful signpost, a way of understanding oneself a little better. They're there anyway. I mean, what are you going to do? Push them down? I mean, what would be the, arguably, if you're looking at it rationally, what would be the point of that? But it's what we do because it's scary. I talk about this podcast came from my exploration of a thing I call fearless compassion, Pete, as you know. And it's not new. I mean, nothing new under the sun anyway. But, people like Tara Brach have radical compassion. Christian Neff talks about fierce compassion. It's the same kind of thing. But what have always been curious about is how, when we realize that we're scared, there's a place we don't want to go, think about even. The thoughts come, they're scary thoughts. What do we do with that? Push on through, for me, has never felt right.
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up with the pushing on through. My mother just got up every day and did what needed to be done without any real thought of what else was available to her as an opportunity. And then for my mum, everything changed when my father died, and all of a sudden, she was a lot younger than he. She found herself with a fresh palette to work from, and she went off and she trained as a florist and set off and ended up traveling around the country doing floral demonstrations all over the place and
Oh my goodness,
doing the flowers in Glasgow Cathedral when royalty was visiting. And she just created this whole new life for herself. And that, if you like, as a learning by seeing opportunity for me was a tremendous thing. But still underneath that was you get up and you do what you need to do. I've been lucky enough to have another stage of that available to me, which is you get up and you do what you do, but you allow yourself to dream. And in the doing what you do, you move slowly, step by step, towards the realization of what it is that you actually want out of life and to begin to choose the people around you that you really want rather than the ones that are thrust upon you. And that's where you begin to mark real progress, I think.
Allowing yourself to evolve through it is what I'm hearing. And it's still about getting up, isn't it? It's, in the end, there might be days when it's hard to do that, but in the end, there is a getting up about it. There is a moving forwards about it. But I suppose with kindness rather than harshness.
Yeah, it's the difference between getting up grumpy because get through another one of these blooming day things that's full of difficulty.
Yes.
Going back to my notions of morphing my ideas about mortality, is you end up, you're waking up and you go, oh my goodness me, I'm still here. I've got another in front of me. What am I going to do? Because the options are endless. And there's a marked difference between the two states. I think the second state becomes more available to you as you get older, if you're lucky. You begin to think in a different way.
If you're lucky or if you consciously create it?
Well, I think the one and the same thing. If you get to consciously create your life, you're very, very lucky.
Very, very lucky. I get that. So, Pete, I would love to touch on your quiet trilogy. Just to come back to that. I mean, you've done a lot of writing over your life. You've contributed immensely to journals and you've written loads of articles, and there's a whole story there, isn't there, in and of itself. But these 3 books that explore what it is to be quiet, how to thrive being quiet, how to lead quiet people. Can you talk a little bit about that and where you see that taking you?
Yeah. Again, that's just been a continuum of responding. The first book, The Art of Shouting Quietly, started before I'd trained as a coach, actually, or just around about the point I was doing that, because a lot of the people that I was working with are very creative folk. And I was noticing there was a very high correlation between creativity and quietness. And I deliberately chose the title Introverts and Other Quiet Souls because it's the other quiet souls that I associate with. And I wanted to write a helpful book about, how do you promote yourself without frightening yourself to death? And that has always been the book that people have associated with me, and always will be, I think. I then moved on to a deeper exploration that was tied in more with me and my own journey, which is the Quiet Person's Guide to Life and Work, which was to encourage people who recognized they were quiet but didn't necessarily associate with the introvert bit to begin to think about, why am I a quiet person? What makes me tick? What are the life events that are under there that makes me who I am? And then how can I survive with that? And then I was running a series of workshops for a government organisation, who unfortunately I can't name. That's really frustrating. Where I had groups of leaders and quiet people in the same group coaching groups, and the leaders were coming to me and saying, "It's not the quiet people that need this, Peter. It's the noisy leaders that really need it." And I thought, right, well, why don't I look at the Quiet Person's Guide and flip it? So essentially, what I've done with the Leader's Guide is just take the same content and flip it so that it's to be read by the leaders rather than the quiet people. So the two books are a mirror, one of each other. So the Leader's Guide, which is available as an ebook, will be published in some form of paperback over the next few months and will be available. And to me, that fills a gap in the market, really, for leaders who have quiet people on their teams who really don't understand what's going on and who are actually unintentionally abusing some of them. I'll try and say that with humor, because we do things to each other without realizing what's going on. Not realizing that quiet people, of course, need a much longer time to process things for neurochemical reasons apart from anything else. And rush them along and create very stressful situations for them. So the third book is very much about addressing that, and the from there forward, promoting that book and the talks and workshops especially that go with that will be what I'm focusing on.
And I guess what I'm hearing there, and I understand of your work anyway, is the nuance in all of this. That moving away from labeling and limiting and contriving to a much more open, inclusive, understanding, compassionate way of interacting with people. And as a leader, having more ways, practices, tools for understanding people who might be very different, but who have a huge contribution to make if you allow them to, give them the space to listen, know how to listen for that. So immensely helpful, I can imagine, because there's an awful lot of people who, like us, are quiet and would prefer to be quiet and have a lot to offer.
Yeah. Well, if we take the statistics of introversion, maybe 40% of the population are introverted according to the personality test. But then there's a whole bunch of us that are quiet for other reasons. It's a lot of people that have big chunks of quiet around them.
And for leaders, if a leader's main role is to develop others, if you don't understand the person you're there to develop, how can you even do that?
Well, there's also quiet leaders. There are lots of people in management positions that are quiet themselves, and sometimes they need to understand what's driving them in order to understand the other folk that they're.
And I suppose there's a meeting in the middle, isn't there? Somewhere, it's not that we want extroverts to, bend over backwards or vice versa with introverts. There's an understanding where there might be a meeting in the middle where extroverts might dial down a bit, introverts might, dial up a bit to use a crude expression, but somewhere in the middle that the minds meet.
Yeah, well, the thing that I talk about really is this is not about extroverts versus introverts or socially noisy people versus, it's actually about looking at culture. How do we create psychologically safe space within which all those people can thrive and have the time and space to make their contribution? That might involve a bit of slowing down for some, and it might involve a bit of speeding up for others. But it's mediating that space and changing, very simply actually changing workplace culture to create that place where more people can thrive and organizations can work more effectively. Why recruit quiet people for the skills and then not pay attention to them?
Or noisy people for that matter. And creating the conditions. So leadership perhaps is about creating the conditions more than anything else, right? So when you look at what is to come, when you look to the life that you have left to live, what does fearless forward mean to you?
Well, I mean, if you ask me about time, the quick answer would be we do actually have all of the time in the world until we don't. So let's not worry about it. We've got this time. We don't know how much. None of us ever do. It doesn't matter what age we are. But rather than bracketing it with anxiety and worry and over planning things, see it as a lovely blank canvas upon which to explore what we do and how we do it and who we do it with is a healthier way of looking at things, really, rather than becoming time bound, which I think a lot do as they get older.
Like a sense of scarcity, isn't it? And so your approach would be more abundant, the opposite of that. And is that what that means to you then, to move forward with that in mind?
Yes. Yeah. There is for everybody an abundance of time in each day as it presents itself to us, in terms of what we can do and what we can think about.
And slowing down helps it feel fuller and more abundant, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pete, thank you so much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
With clarity and courage, Pete has created a life that aligns with his nature and the work he wants to do. Being true to yourself isn't necessarily about chasing big dreams or breaking free. It's about visualizing all possible options open to you and making deliberate choices. Where you live, how you spend your time, and who you spend it with. And here are some other key takeaways from our wide-ranging conversation in no particular order. Fear is a message from a deeper part of ourselves. It shows us what matters, where we're vulnerable, and what might need our attention. Better to see it as a friend, not an enemy, that helps us make better decisions. Facing up to our own mortality is a way of making sure we make the most of our life. And slowing down, moving slowly, pausing, especially through transitions, helps us manage our fear and create the space we need to reflect and make intentional choices. Our sense of self is shaped by our past. Understanding the roots of our own traits can help us move forward with greater self-awareness and compassion. Community matters, even for those of us who seek solitude. We can find connection and belonging in unexpected places and live slowly and quietly while being part of something bigger. Cognitive diffusion, or calming our cluttered minds by separating ourselves from our thoughts, is a huge aid to clarity and is a practice we can develop. An effective workplace culture is one where no one is labelled and where everyone can find the conditions they need to thrive and do their best work together. For inspiration on how to create those conditions, Pete's books are a wonderful source of wisdom. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org, activate push notifications from your favourite podcast source, or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.